So if there's a prompt for you to agree, please feel free to hit that. All right, so welcome to this exploration, which I'm really excited to share with you. I thought it might be really helpful as a community to just start with a little practice, and I'm going to leave it up to really each of you to decide kind of how you want to practice. But I've been very interested in both structured and unstructured practice. And so maybe we'll begin with a structured practice. So choosing a way that suits you now, that you're familiar with, that can help you gather attention and sort of ground you in your experience, whatever that may be. So maybe just like 2 minutes of silence. We'll practice now in a way that really suits you. And again, that's voluntary. If you don't feel like practicing, you can do whatever you like to do. So we'll do that. And then maybe we'll shift into a slightly different unstructured practice if you're interested, and see how that goes. So we'll begin now, just 2 minutes of silence, and then we'll shift. Resting whatever practice supports you right now. So working in a structured way and with my attention, we notice attention comes and goes, and appearances of various objects come and go. There's also an unstructured way that I'm interested in these days, that is not necessarily using attention, but instead to kind of recognize that my experience of my attention could be described as sort of appearing in the foreground of the mind, and that there is this other spaciousness in which attention appears and changes that I could also recognize, that doesn't require effort. And so we could indulge in just exploring non-meditation as sort of the experience of aliveness or wakefulness, the ongoing continuity of knowing moment to moment. So if you're interested in that, you could try that too for the next minute. And then maybe reorienting to sounds, the sound of my voice coming through the speaker, the sound of the space around you, wherever you are, and inviting the body to move and inviting your eyes to return to the screen and to each other. So a little framework to set things up before we kind of jump off into this. So I've been thinking a lot about our field, and as a therapist, the field of psychology and the fields of neuroscience, and there's a lot of effort now to kind of figure out what things are. And I've taken a dialectic approach, which is that, on the one hand, there's the sort of materialistic view about the brain and consciousness and what emerges, and the other view where that consciousness might be primary, and that we really don't know what consciousness is. And so I've sort of taken this approach to both these views are true depending on your perspective, and whether you're looking at sort of a relativistic view or an absolute view. And given that, though, when I'm teaching mindfulness to a group of students whose background I don't know, or if I'm working in the context of psychotherapy, that kind of ambiguity can be, off-putting. It can also be destabilizing. So what I'm going to offer you today is some work that Diana Winston turned me towards, I think, back in 2000 and maybe 15, and share with you some of the work that I've used, given this research, to make things a little more clear around the subject of emotion and feeling, and that I've found for my clients really, really helpful. That said, it's not the final statement, of course. It's not the end statement. We're still trying to understand things, and there's a lot more that we need to know, and certainly lots of traditional ways of understanding the emotions and this inner world may or may not square with what I'm about to share. Although I do find in many different traditional Buddhist texts, there are some really lovely correspondences. So I offer this as a way to explore solid Western view, but again, holding it very lightly. So hopefully that will make sense. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll do a little slideshow, and then, at any point you can unmic yourself and ask a question, because I will not see a lot of you, so I will be able to hear you, and that is the most important part. And then we'll have a period, hopefully, for questions that are more of an engagement and conversation afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink that. Play this. Okay. Feeling, body, emotion, mind. So we're going to just go ahead and cover some, again, from the viewpoint of neuroscience, some myths about emotion, what some of the new neuroscience says about emotion and feelings, and how mindfulness can sort of bring these kind of abstract concepts to life. And then how do we maybe use those experiences to inform how we might teach and share things with people. So I'm going to show you first a TED Talk from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett out of Northeastern University, where she really first premiered these ideas. I use this TED Talk in teaching law enforcement and lots of other contexts, because it really kind of gathers together all the data and makes a lot of great concrete examples out of it. But even so, I find a lot of people still need quite a bit of exploration to make sense of it. So let's see what happens for you.
My research lab sits about a mile from where several bombs exploded during the Boston Marathon in 2013. The surviving bomber, Zakhar Tsarnaev of Chechnya, was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Now, when a jury has to make the decision between life in prison and the death penalty, they base their decision largely on whether or not the defendant feels remorseful for his actions. Tsarnaev spoke words of apology, but when jurors looked at his face, all they saw was a stone-faced stare. Now, Tsarnaev is guilty. There's no doubt about that. He murdered and maimed innocent people, and I'm not here to debate that. My heart goes out to all the people who suffered. But as a scientist, I have to tell you that jurors do not and cannot detect remorse or any other emotion in anybody ever. Neither can I, and neither can you. And that's because emotions are not what we think they are. They are not universally expressed and recognized. They are not hardwired brain reactions that are uncontrollable. We have misunderstood the nature of emotion for a very long time, and understanding what emotions really are have important consequences for all of us. I have studied emotions as a scientist for the past 25 years, and in my lab, we have probed human faces by measuring electrical signals that cause your facial muscles to contract to make facial expressions. We have scrutinized the human body in emotion. We have analyzed hundreds of physiology studies involving thousands of test subjects. We've scanned hundreds of brains and examined every brain imaging study on emotion that has been published in the past 20 years. And the results of all of this research is overwhelmingly consistent. It may feel to you like your emotions are hardwired and they just trigger and happen to you, but they don't. You might believe that your brain is pre-wired with emotion circuits, that you're born with emotion circuits, but you're not. In fact, none of us in this room have emotion circuits in our brain. In fact, no brain on this planet contains emotion circuits. So what are emotions really? Well, strap on your seatbelt, because emotions are guesses. They are guesses that your brain constructs in the moment where billions of brain cells are working together. And you have more control over those guesses than you might imagine that you do. Now, if that sounds preposterous to you or, kind of crazy, I'm right there with you, because frankly, if I hadn't seen the evidence for myself, decades of evidence for myself, I am fairly sure that I wouldn't believe it either. But the bottom line is that emotions are not built into your brain at birth. They are just built. To see what I mean, have a look at this. Right now, your brain is working like crazy. Your neurons are firing like mad, trying to make meaning out of this so that you see something other than black and white blobs. Your brain is sifting through a lifetime of experience, making thousands of guesses at the same time, weighing the probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like? Not what is it, but what is this most like in my past experience? And this is all happening in the blink of an eye. Now, if your brain is still struggling to find a good match and you still see black and white blobs, then you are in a state called experiential blindness.
Marcy, could you be sure to mute yourself and make sure everyone else, if you're here, just double check to make sure you're all muted. That'd be really helpful. Thank you so much.
And I am going to cure you of your blindness. This is my favorite part. Are you ready to be cured? All right, here we go. All right. So now, many of you see a snake. And why is that? Because as your brain is sifting through your past experience, there's new knowledge there, the knowledge that came from the photograph. And what's really cool is that that knowledge, which you just acquired moments ago, is changing how you experience these blobs right now. So your brain is constructing the image of a snake where there is no snake. And this kind of a hallucination is what neuroscientists like me call predictions. Predictions are basically the way your brain works. It's business as usual for your brain. Predictions are the basis of every experience that you have. They are the basis of every action that you take. In fact, predictions are what allow you to understand the words that I'm speaking as they come out of my mouth. Exactly. Predictions are primal, right? They help us to make sense of the world in a quick and efficient way. So your brain does not react to the world. Using past experience, your brain predicts and constructs your experience of the world. The way that we see emotions in others are deeply rooted in predictions, right? So to us, it feels like we just look at someone's face and we just read the emotion that's there in their facial expressions the way that we would read words on a page. But actually, under the hood, your brain is predicting. It's using past experience based on similar situations to try to make meaning. This time, you're not making meaning of blobs, you're making meaning of facial movements, like the curl of a lip or the raise of an eyebrow. And that stone-faced stare, well, that might be someone who is a remorseless killer. But a stone-faced stare might also mean that someone is stoically accepting defeat, which is in fact what Chechen culture prescribes for someone in Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's situation. So the lesson here is that emotions that you seem to detect in other people actually come in part from what's inside your own head. And this is true in the courtroom, but it's also true in the classroom, in the bedroom, and in the boardroom. And so here's my concern. Tech companies, which shall remain nameless, well, maybe not, Google, Facebook, are spending millions of research dollars to build emotion detection systems. And they are fundamentally asking the wrong question because they're trying to detect emotions in the face and the body, but emotions aren't in your face and body. Physical movements have no intrinsic emotional meaning. We have to make them meaningful. A human or something else has to connect them to the context, and that makes them meaningful. That's how we know that, a smile might mean sadness, and a cry might mean happiness, and a stoic, still face might mean that you are angrily plotting the demise of your enemy. Now, if I haven't already, gone out on a limb, I'll just edge out on that limb a little further and tell you that the way that you experience your own emotion is exactly the same process. Your brain is basically making predictions, guesses that it's constructing in the moment with billions of neurons working together. Now, your brain does come pre-wired to make some feelings, right? Simple feelings that come from the physiology of your body. So when you're born, you can make feelings like calmness and agitation, excitement, comfort, discomfort. But these simple feelings are not emotions. They're actually with you every waking moment of your life. They are simple summaries of what's going on inside your body, kind of like a barometer. But they have very little detail. And you need that detail to know what to do next. What do you do about these feelings? And so how does your brain give you that detail? Well, that's what predictions are. Predictions link the sensations in your body that give you these simple feelings with what's going on around you in the world so that you know what to do. And sometimes those constructions are emotions. So for example, if you were to walk into a bakery, your brain might predict that you will encounter the delicious aroma of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. I know my brain would predict the delicious aroma of freshly baked chocolate cookies, and our brains might cause our stomachs to churn a little bit to prepare for eating those cookies. And if we are correct, if in fact some cookies have just come out of the oven, then our brains will have constructed hunger, and we are prepared to munch down those cookies and digest them in a very efficient way, meaning that we can eat a lot of them, which would be a really good thing. You guys aren't not laughing enough. I'm totally serious. This is really, but here's the thing, that churning stomach if it occurs in a different situation, it can have a completely different meaning. So if your brain were to predict a churning stomach in, say, a hospital room while you're waiting for test results, then your brain will be constructing dread or worry or anxiety. And it might cause you to maybe wring your hands or take a deep breath or even cry. Right? Same physical sensations, same churning stomach, different experience. And so the lesson here is that emotions which seem to happen to you are actually made by you. You are not at the mercy of mythical emotion circuits, which are buried deep inside some ancient part of your brain. You have more control over your emotions than you think you do. I don't mean that you can just snap your fingers and, change how you feel the way that you would change your clothes. But your brain is wired so that if you change the ingredients that your brain uses to make emotion, then you can transform your emotional life. So if you change those ingredients today, you're basically teaching your brain how to predict differently tomorrow. And this is what I call being the architect of your experience.
Okay, so let's see if we can take some of those key points and open them up a little bit and really talk about emotional intelligence, which I think is another way to describe what Lisa's research is all about. And using this idea of construction theory, which is these days in neuroscience is the accepted understanding of how the brain and consciousness sort of interact in terms of our first-person experience. So we know that we often hear of the amygdala hijack, and I've been advocating among my psychotherapy colleagues and occasionally when I have conversations with mindfulness teachers that this phraseology isn't helpful for a lot of different reasons. One of them is that it creates a kind of dichotomy in the relationship between my awareness, the sense of being an observer, being an experiencer, and my body, that some part of my brain or body could be adversarial and hijack me, hijack my control and my comfort. And that adversarial relationship isn't helpful. But also this misunderstanding of the amygdala as this primal sort of part of the brain that is the fear center. But the truth is that if you look at, even some of the articles recently published in Mindful Magazine, the amygdala is actually not the fear center. It's part of the salient center. And so, yes, it lights up when there's fear, but it also lights up if you won a lottery. It lights up when things are important to pay attention to. And so, as she said earlier, there isn't really one emotional center of the brain because of what emotions actually are. There are a larger sort of phenomena of concepts. If we look at another piece of the mythology that, from the Western science point of view, still holds the idea that emotions are in our body. This comes from a slide that was done with a study where people were kind of coloring in where they thought their emotions were and how intense they were, blue being less intense, red being more intense. But when we think about the differentiation between emotions and feelings, then this sort of points to the fact that we use emotions and the word feelings in sort of a conflated way. And it leads to a lot of confusion about how do we be present to this experience we're having. And, with mindfulness being sort of this very precise, potentially, tool to deconstruct our experience, that becomes kind of confusing. So it's going to be helpful to differentiate those. So as Lisa was showing in her research, that emotions and facial expressions are not universal. They seem to be, without close examination, but her replication of dozens and dozens of research studies on this, as well as her own original design of published research, shows that facial expressions have a wide variety of meaning, and they're not universal. They're quite cultural and quite idiosyncratic for the individual. The other myth around this is that emotions and feelings are sort of really the same thing. And so we want to try and figure out how do we dissect those? How do we differentiate them? And why would we want to do that? What would it mean for us? So when we look at a definition of feelings, I like what she was saying earlier, this idea that we're born with feelings, not emotions, and that feelings are physiological. And so they include this genetic inheritance of temperament, the current moment of physiology, and the mood that might be supported by that, and this embodied sense of being in the body, right? That's part of that. It's with us all the time. If we care to look for it, it's always there, it's reliable, and it's there 24/7. And because they aren't precisely universal for everyone, they need interpretation, right? And that's really what emotions are. So emotions are conceptual. They're implied in how our minds tell the story of me in this moment. They're constructed on the spot, and they make sense if there's awareness of bodily information, whether it's really conscious or even perhaps subconscious. It makes sense of what's going on, but the emotions themselves are conceptual. They're therefore learned. We're not born with concepts. We acquire them. We're conditioned into thinking about what these different things are. So for a lot of people, this is confusing. It was for me. I had to work with this quite a bit and work with her literature to make some clarity around it. So let's play around with it a little bit together. So affect is another word for feeling. And so she has one of these graphs in one of her presentations in a TED Talk entitled The Power of Mood. It's a simple way to kind of understand that affect exists on a continuum. So you can see here that we could have somewhere we could, or in the middle between pleasant and unpleasant, so sort of in that neutral horizontal graph, and then we might be highly aroused, alert, activated, versus calm, right? And other dyads of these ranges, we can do different graphs: hunger and satiety, being anxious or relaxed, comfortable or discomfortable or uncomfortable, focused or scattered, awake or drowsy. So these are all affects, feeling states, and they may or may not be present and inform how we are experiencing the story of this moment, the story of myself. Emotions, however, are different, and there are quite a variety of them. So if we just look at one category or one particular emotion that has a lot of variance, it's a concept, right? So emotions are conceptual and they're learned in the various places we get exposed to conditioning. So an example of anger, right? We have lots of different variations of anger: irritation, frustration, being mad, indignation, vitriolic or vitriol, outrage, right? So all those are different variations of this category, and each of them has a specific definition, and they don't all exist in different parts of the body, right? They're really conceptual. And if you think about using those emotion words to describe our situation, the situation would really be specific. And so the work of Brene Brown really talks a lot about the need for emotion granularity, that we have very few working definitions of these emotions to be specific about our circumstances. And that specificity is really needed for the insight about what's going on and why. So having more emotion vocabulary can be very, very powerful. Let's see if I can admit that person. There we go. So if we look at emotions and feelings in real time, this is sort of an idea of a granular causal look at experience. In the range of awareness, we'll have this feeling state, this affective state of a pleasant, neutral, or negative or unpleasant experience. And then there's a percept that immediately appears that will conceptualize the situation, either with clarity or confusion, but it's a conceptualization. And the narrative emerges from that. And embedded within that narrative, which is conceptual, are emotions, emotion concepts. So having this really gives us a way to look for and differentiate elements of our experience. So if we take 3 different scenarios to illustrate this. So in the first scenario on the left, we have a student who's the final person taking a licensing exam and the clock is running out. In the second scenario in the middle, perhaps we come home and there's something from an acquaintance who is making a romantic overture toward us. And the third scenario is coming at the top of a roller coaster right before the first drop. And so the feelings in the body could include increased heart rate, maybe the sensation of butterflies near our solar plexus, and perhaps heightened focus, right? So all 3 of those physiological conditions could be present in all 3 of those scenarios. But the emotions could be very, very different, even though the physiology is similar. In the first case, it might be fear and doubt as my mind wonders if I'll be able to finish the test, and if the fact that I'm the last one, maybe I'm not doing so well as other people, right? In the second situation, I might experience the emotions of hope and confidence because of my attraction to this new acquaintance and this romantic overture. And the third situation could be, you can't quite see that there, excitement and joy, or exhilaration and joy. If it's me, it would be terror because I hate roller coasters. But in any case, the way that the mind tells the story of the moment is where we would look for the emotion, not in the body. One of the reasons why this is really important is because of this idea called affective realism. So when we have someone who's, for instance, experiencing anxiety in the literature is actually a collection of different sensations. So it could be sweaty palms, rapid heartbeat, shallow respiration, tense muscles, agitation and movement. But really, the source of that is going to be thinking in the future, anticipating something that is probably overestimated in terms of its impact and an underestimation of our ability to cope with it, all of which are concepts. And what happens with that situation is that as I think about the thing that I'm worried about, and I become aware of my body, feeling is reinforcing the veracity of my thoughts. And so it's really that seeing is believing, but feeling is believing. And so this is where we can get into a loop where the confusion about what's happening in my body and what's happening in my mind can reinforce being trapped in anxiety. And so using mindfulness as a tool to see clearly and to deconstruct experience, we might be able to find different routes to help people with anxiety and move away from believing it because I feel it. So with mindfulness of feeling, then we really turn to the body. And so this power of the body scan and the power of learning to rest in more and more non-conceptual experiences of body sensations, differentiating them from the way that we might imagine body parts with our visual sense, or tell stories about the body parts that we like or don't like, or that are in pain or that are comfortable, right? We start to differentiate from conceptual aspects of the body and drop into the direct experience that is felt and is non-conceptual. So just for a moment, we could maybe try that together. We could try just, if you're interested, you can join us in closing your eyes. And if you can, just remember to check to see if you're muted, because it'll help to reduce distractions. But if you'd like to try just for a moment and close your eyes, and notice that when you close your eyes, a feeling of being inside, which is an interesting kind of commentary on the non-locality and the locality simultaneously of the mind. What you could notice that your body feels a certain way as you're taking this shape. And shape evokes images, but see if you can feel the shape of your body right now without having to rely on a picture. If a picture comes, that's part of how the mind functions, but see if you can feel, for instance, the meeting of whatever's supporting your hips, the firmness of that, or the softness of that. And just rest with that. See if you can allow that continuous streaming of information to be known in a simple way. And again, if you could check to see if you are muted, that would be helpful to mute yourself. Returning to just feeling the solidity of being supported and noticing that the breath is an expansion and contraction of sensation, a tidal rhythm of movement. And see if you can rest with that without needing to think or image, but rather simply receive the wave of sensations. Noticing that the mind might constantly want to jump in to manage this experience, and that there is something simpler and more direct available the moment I just open attention to feel and receive the body, which is always streaming up into awareness. Sort of bottom up experience, as it's said. Maybe we'd end this tiny practice with just an exhale, allowing the exhale to return us to the screen if your eyes were closed, and we can move into another practice. So one of the things that's often helpful for people I work with is to talk about how the mind is really both like the breath. The breath is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, but I can also intervene. I can make it longer or shorter. I can hold my breath for a certain amount of time, but ultimately the nervous system dominates and will force me to breathe at some point. And in the same way, the mind generates thoughts with the support of the brain all day long, and we don't control that or create that perfectly, right? So we often get the experience that we're always the author of the thought, but quite often when we sit and practice, we start to realize, oh yeah, thoughts appear and disappear on their own. I can deliberately generate thoughts, but also I can allow thoughts to just happen without necessarily being attached to them. This is a really important practice, especially if we're going to explore emotion as concepts. So the theater of the mind is one of the ways that Lama Alan Wallace talks about a simple practice from the Tibetan tradition, which we can try now, which I use with a lot of clients to explore the automatic nature of thinking and beginning to differentiate the nature of thought. So if you'd like to take just a few moments with me now, we could try that. So this really works best with your eyes closed, but you could do it with your eyes open. If you do it with your eyes open, you might want to just stare at the wall or some place on the floor that's fairly blank. And if you keep your eyes open, you can just, of course, blink your eyes, keep your legs relaxed so that they're not uncomfortable. Either way, eyes open or closed, you're going to rest your attention on the visual field and allow the visual field to be your object. If your eyes are closed, it's darker and maybe pixelated. There may be areas of light, areas of dark. If you're like me, you have floaters. So you just rest for a moment and just looking, the experience of looking. And then begin to notice that thoughts can appear either as sounds or as images or as both. And just allow them to appear and just notice the nature of thought as the witness behind or back behind the face, behind the eyes, where the visual field is the theater and you are in the witness. Letting the thoughts arise as they do, and watching. being curious about how they emerge and how long they stay and how they change or disappear. Gently letting that go. Nancy, if you could mute yourself, that'd be great. So letting that practice go and just noticing what's here from that experience. Nancy, if you could mute yourself, Nancy, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. So one of the things we can do here is use a schematic that helps people understand sort of how to relate to thoughts. So most of the structured practices that we use, mindfulness of breathing, the body scan, mindfulness of thoughts, can be described this way. So we begin at the 9 o'clock position and pay active everyday attention to some object, some information. And at some point, our attention goes on autopilot. At some point, we remember, we become mindful, and we begin again. And so I use this schematic to help people accept and embrace the idea that we need to go around and around and around to develop these skills of attending and seeing clearly. When we're working with thoughts, we might make a little variation. So we pay attention to information, various kinds of anchors, and passive attention actually normally happens. We remember to return, but at some point we might decide, instead of going to body sensations and the anchors of feeling, we might turn attention directly, as we did in the theater of the mind practice. And when we have enough attention and stability, we can begin to use thoughts as the object and begin to notice nature of thoughts and the narratives they weave.
Sorry, Nancy? Nancy, can you please
Yes.
mute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sure. How?
I think, Nancy, at the bottom left corner of your screen, there should be a little icon of a microphone. And if you click that, it should mute.
I'm not seeing it, but I don't see anything here. Leave, Zoom, camera. Oh, I see up there. I'm so sorry.
That's all right, Nancy, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can use this schematic to point to the idea that something that's not quite so concrete as thought could actually also be an object in our practice. So when we're using a practice like RAIN, this actually becomes really, really helpful. I use this a lot in psychotherapy, where we have a need to identify the stories from intimate distance. I'm not quite as identified with the story, but I want to examine it. And so you know the acronym fairly well. So the idea here would be to rest in the acceptance of what's here, and then turn towards the body first to investigate the body sensations. And again, the more we can do that with less conceptuality, less story around the body, the more we can ground ourselves in the immediate flow of feeling, the immediate flow of affect. And then we turn towards what keeps pulling us away from the body, which is the story of the moment, the story of the problem. And being grounded in body sensations as the place, not where emotion is taking place, but rather the immediacy of physiology, the immediacy of experience, we can have a platform from which to notice the mind. I remember in an old talk from John Kabat-Zinn, he sort of talked about how if the attention was like a telescope, it needs solid ground. If it's on kind of a uneven, unstable surface, it keeps moving, and the thing we're trying to look at keeps going in and out of view. So the body provides a really stable ground, even with its fluctuation of sensations, from which to observe this appearance of narrative, images, story, symbols, and of course, emotions. And from there, we can have that intimate distance, which is not the same as identification, right? I'm noticing a story about myself not being adequate for some situation, and I can unpack that from a really compassionate distance, and then nurture myself and maybe begin to construct a new narrative that's based on my aspirations, my values, other kinds of experiences that are perhaps fleshing out this fuller sense of self. So I use this practice quite a bit to really skill people in not believing everything they think, but respecting it in a deeper way. So before I open it to a little conversation and stop the screen share, this is the book that Diana turned me onto back in 2015. I highly recommend it. It's really a terrific read and has tremendous not only research, but also practical applications for the importance of taking care of the body, since that affective realism is so strong that we understand that sleep and nutrition and exercise and hydration and contact with other human bodies is so vital for affect regulation. We know that if the body is dysregulated, it's much harder to be disidentified with the thought stories that appear. So there's a lot in there about that. This is Lisa's website, a tremendous treasure trove of both interviews, TED Talks, articles, and research as well. And then if you don't have ways to reach me, those are my websites. So if those are helpful, they're there. And I will have about 10 minutes to have a conversation and see what all you think about all this. Thoughts, challenges, ideas. I'm going to look at the
Ryan,
chat.
I have a question. Are you able to go back to the slide where you have awareness, goes to feelings, positive, neutrals, and perception? And then I just wanted to capture the rest of that flow.
Absolutely. Let's do
Thank
that.
you.
Okay. I'm going to just get to that quickly so I can do it efficiently. Is not always something I'm good at. There we go. Okay. And let's pop the screen share. And we'll look at that together. There we go. Okay. Okay, so what do you see here?
Well, that's helpful. Thank you, to just so that I could kind of finish that in my notes. Yeah, I think it's helpful the way that you framed it. For me, I feel like I've heard you give a similar talk before, and it's helpful to hear how rain helps us create some separation. And I love how you said that we get to find some stability in the body, just to notice the sensations, but to not get trapped in the story of the sensations, and then to create space from the story that we're replaying in our mind. Is just, I don't know, something clicked for me that was different in the past. So thank you.
Oh, great. I appreciate that. That's good to know. It's very important. Yeah. As I work with people with trauma, there's a tremendous fusion of layers and layers of stories about body sensations that need to be unpacked. And it's very difficult to unpack these trauma memories if I believe that somehow there's information hidden in my body that could scare me and overtake me, all right, hijack me. So one of the things we do to help people find safety is titrating body sensations that are neutral and start to bring these ideas and direct experience of these ideas in parts of the body that are very safe, and provide the psychoeducation so that they begin to venture forth to the areas that are associated with the trauma memory, and we begin to decondition them around and separate them from the trauma. So that's a long process that's, has to be done very carefully, but it is one of the ways that helps. Let's go to, I see some questions. Janine?
Thank you very much for your presentation, Brian. It's very interesting. I've seen her book back in 2015, probably, and avoided it. So I'm happy to come back around to it and be open to it today. But I am interested in this notion, RAIN has several definitions. You've used the most ample one with many interpretations, like investigate with intimacy. But this notion of nurturing seems so related to emotions in a way. So what does nurturing look like? I teach mindful self-compassion. We're talking about warmth, but are we bringing like calmness to the feeling of calmness to a feeling of agitation, or what is that?
Yeah, so it's really dependent on so many factors. So it depends, first of all, I think on the level of the person's immediate need. So if someone feels really uncomfortable and has aversion to the experience of, let's say, the emotion story that's emerging, then we will try and lead them, and hopefully we'll have done some work prior to know more about this individual to see what are the edges of their comfort, so that we have some places to go that we've already talked about ahead of time. So it might be that the person really needs to end the practice, begin to orient around the room, and stabilize the fact that, oh, this is actually an appearance of memory that's going on, a lot of assumptions that's going on. And so maybe we might look out the window together, we might take a walk together, whatever it is that grounds them in the here and now might be something that we need to do. It could be, things from mindful self-compassion, a self-hug, it could be a breath work, it could be that we've set up some tea that they can sip, or some aromatherapy, anything that brings a sense of grounding, a sense of autonomy, a sense of, this is what I do to care for myself. So a wide range of possibilities there. And it's always best to, if we're dealing with people we know have some powerful emotion memories around fear or trauma or sadness or grief or whatever it is, that we work ahead of time, we cope ahead and have things ready and available. Why it's challenging to do this in a group, because we really don't have the time to know each person's individual story, so we have to be really mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful. Makes a lot of sense.
Let's go to Alex and then to Michael.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I have a question about like working with people and like how to kind of apply this information. So like many of my clients as a therapist will, they'll have that experience of like, but it feels true. It feels true. And so even trying to like help them depersonalize the sensations and just kind of observe them, there's still that like you said, the fusion to like it feeling true. And so I was just wondering like how maybe you use this information to like defuse that.
Yeah, this is one of the great challenges, because not only is it phenomenologically true, right, but also we're told to trust our feelings. And the thing is that we can have very strong feelings about something that is interpreted from our past that really is no longer true, and yet the feeling emerges, right? And so we have to, first of all, I think, always validate the person's experience, that this is where they are, and that we're not trying to tell them that they're wrong, but we want to try first see what is needed in this moment. So it might be that we can't disentangle that interpretation of the feeling at this time. It might be much later in the process, or there might be an opportunity to do it. It really all depends on their insight. So part of mindfulness is about insight into a clearer perception of the elements of experience and the self. So if the person has strong insight, and we've done some groundwork to recognize that the felt sense can be both accurate and inaccurate, depending on what kinds of knowledge I have as a background, before approaching some really personal ways that feeling shows up as an experience and creates a sense of reality, that will be a kind of place where I can start to leverage earlier insight moments. What if that feeling that you had that your son was really mad at you when you saw that facial expression and they didn't reply to your text right away, then you found out that they were totally fine, right? You had a really strong feeling that that was true, and then you found out it wasn't true. What if this current situation is similar to that? How would we find that out together, right? So we want to invite them into a sense of exploration, but we always meet them where they are with validation first, because we want them to relax and open. Curiosity can't happen if I don't trust and if I'm not open. So I need to first meet them right where they are and walk with them in that space for a bit, and then see if we've done the groundwork. The groundwork is really important. And quite often, depending on the case, some people are really, they go right into their problems and they don't give us a chance to kind of pause that and build the skills of perception and discernment and creating some distance and space around our percepts. And so we need to really get that groundwork done, I think, before we can tackle something that you're talking about, which is complicated. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah.
Michael, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too, Brian. I may be biased here because I'm friends with Eve Ekman, but and I've had discussions with her about Lisa Feldman Barrett's book. So what would make Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory? Well, I guess for me, what would be the difference with her theory compared to Paul Ekman's? And how can you prove it scientifically?
Scientifically.
How would you do that? I mean, because they
Great.
both.
Yeah, this is a battle that's taking place in academia. And so Paul Ekman is a brilliant scientist and a friend of the Dalai Lama's. And he's written a wonderful book that's on my shelf called Emotion Awareness. And he's the guy who talks about microexpressions and says that facial expressions are universal across all cultures, across all time. And Lisa says, nope, your research is biased and has some hidden bias in the research design, and it's not replicable. And so they're having a public debate that's, I think, mostly respectable, but it's pretty heated. I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't answer that question for you, but here's what I can tell you. As a husband and as a father of a 15-year-old boy adopted from Thailand, what gets me into trouble is assumptions that I make based on vocal tone and facial expression, that I can impute to my wife a kind of corrective tone, when in fact she's just business tone. And it's all in my head. It's all a projection that I'm interpreting. And so I'll elevate my voice, and she said, why are you getting defensive? And I say, well, because you're coming in telling me that I'm wrong about XYZ, or that you're punishing me. She goes, I am not punishing you at all. I was just asking you a question. How does that happen? And I do couples therapy, and this happens to everybody. And it's because our assumptions about facial expressions and vocal tone are idiosyncratic. They're not universal. So to me, what I love about Lisa's message is that these are some general cultural norms that you have to hold very lightly. Every person needs to be seen as an individual. I need to learn who they are. I need to know their facial expressions as they express them in a wide variety of contexts. And that's a lot of work, and that's our work. And so I can't use universal facial expressions as an absolute, because it gets you into trouble. It's much more complex than that. And we deserve to respect each other more by much closer inspection and curiosity about, what are you thinking right now? What are you feeling right now in your body? What is the story that your mind is telling you right now about me and us? And how can I know that better? Right? That's the humility that we need moving forward. And I think Lisa's model is much more facilitating that than Mr. Ekman's. That's my experience. But again, I'm not a neuroscientist. We've hit our time. This will be recorded and available to everybody. Stacy, the awesomeness, will be sharing it with everyone in our community. Thank you so much for going on the ride with me. I really appreciate your attendance and your work that you're all doing with yourselves and with the people you care about. and the people who show up for you. So be well. Thanks so much. And we will see you again next time.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Brian.
for doing this. We can all
Thanks
just
a
give
lot,
Brian
Brian.
some love
Appreciate
for this really great
Thank you
presentation.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.